Cool. Good evening, everyone. Good to see you all. So, my intention tonight is to just, talk a little bit about the parsha and some of the ideas that we can get out of the parsha, and specific focus on, I guess, what we would call the Teshuva in the parsha, and all of these parsha, as I mentioned in the past, all these parsha are very much intertwined with the concept of teshuva. But just a brief rundown. So, of course, this is Parshat Tetze. Parshat Tetze has a total of 74 mitzvot. It is basically just mitzvah after mitzvah after mitzvah. So 74, the largest amount of mitzvot, are in this week's parsha. Is it more than mishpatim? I'm not sure, but it's up there. I'll just mention very briefly, again, this is just kind of like the overview. So we have, of course, it begins with Ben Sorer Umoreh, right? The story of, first off, Eshet Yafat Toar, a woman who's taken captive in war. That's a separate thing. And then a husband and who has two wives, and one wife is hated, one wife is loved, and then after that, the Ben Sorer Umoreh, the rebellious child, and of course the rabbis connect those three things to talk about how, well, really you shouldn't take this woman in war, because if you do, you're going to end up having a bad relationship, and if you have that bad relationship, it's going to lead to having a rebellious child. That's a fascinating thing on its own, a very famous opening to the parsha. It also talks about ensuring the dignity of a child. The dignity of a dead body, and not, if somebody is put to death, then their body shouldn't hang there. And you couldn't think of what's that TV show? The midwives, not the midwives, the Handmaid's Tale. I don't know if you've watched that thing. Awful show. But they would keep the bodies up there so people could see. And the only episode I saw, returning a lost object, which we'll talk about this evening, sending away the mother bird, Shiluach Haken, also fascinating topic that can be discussed on its own. The responsibility to build a ma'akeh, a safety fence, an important mitzvah. And then, of course, the different types of kilayim. Kilayim are forbidden mixtures. It's prohibited to mix different things together, different foods together, different clothing types together, shatnez. So that is kilayim. We talk also about, God forbid, the judicial process and punishment for adultery. There's also a husband who falsely accuses his wife of infidelity. We have issues of Jewish lineage. We have issues of a mamzer, God forbid, a child who's born of a forbidden relationship, whether adulterous or incestuous. We have the laws relating to the Moabite and Ammonite males, and also the Edomites and the Egyptians. We also talk about the purity of them. I mean, there's just so much there. You can read the parsha. If you look at the newsletter, which will be sent out in just a couple of hours, then you'll see the overview of the parsha. So 74 mitzvot, lots going on in this week's parsha. Lots of really fascinating laws. But I want to focus on just
Can I just interrupt you, because I'm just laughing inside, because two things. One, when you talk about a parsha like this, I always wonder what my girls are going to come home with from primary school and what bits of the parsha they're going to focus on. Yeah. And then the other thing is, there's this girl who calls herself Delish24, and she makes parsha cupcakes. And she does 6 cupcakes with different pictures on all of them.
Yeah.
And as you were talking, I was just thinking, there could be some quite interesting pictures on those this week.
I think she should. I'm sure, certainly in school as well, although sometimes they send home some things I'm like, what are they thinking? But I would hope that they skip over, it's there's some things to skip over. It's kind of like there's parts of the Torah that primary kids never learn. For example, the story of Yehuda and Tamar is skipped over by primary students, nor should they really be learning it, right? But because it just doesn't, it's kind of complex for them to. Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see the cupcakes for this week's parsha. Okay, I want to focus on a very important mitzvah. I'm just going to share my screen with you, and that is the mitzvah of Hashavat Avedah, of returning a lost object, hashavat aveda. So let's just read the verses together. A famous little, there's a lot that can be learned out of these particular verses. So let's just look at it quickly. Lo tired, this is the beginnings, chapter 22, verse 1 through 4. Lo tiret shorachicha o seyo nidachim. If you see your fellow's ox or sheep gone astray, v'hit alamta mehem. Do not ignore it. Now, this is just, I'll just point out, this is a weird sort of way of writing the pasuk, because it says, you shall not, literally it says, you shall not see your fellow's ox and ignore them, right? Do not see them, and ignore them. But the rabbis are like, well, that's a weird way of saying that, because it could have said, if you see them, don't ignore them. But it says, do not see them and ignore them. So the rabbis actually learn out that there are some situations in which you should ignore it. All right, and that's a separate thing, like when do you not have to, that's a whole area of halach on its own, when do you not have to return a lost object to a person? And we gather it from this strange formulation of this phrase, because it seems to suggest that there are times that you do ignore them, okay? But nonetheless, let's just stick to the simple reading. Hashev tishivem la'achicha, you shall give it back to your fellow. But if your fellow does not live near you, or you do not know who he is, you have to then bring it into your home, and then you have to bring it into your home and look after it, and until you figure it out, and you have to basically work it out. And then the question arises: how long can you wait, and what do you have to do in order to figure out who it belongs to? And there's all this, the things about having a symbol and a sign that tells you who it is. Okay. So you should do with his donkey, so you should do with his garment. So too should with anything that your fellow loses, it says, you must not remain indifferent. Now, the obvious question, which again is not the focus tonight, but if you're just kind of thinking with a rabbinic mindset, so we say, you shall not run away from your donkey. If you see a donkey, then you got to return it, or a sheep. Sorry, an ox or a sheep. Okay, and then it says, and so too a donkey. Well, okay, obviously a donkey, and so too a garment. Well, obviously a garment, and then you should do for everything that they lose. Why don't you just say, if you find anything, return it, right? Why do you have to go through each and every one of those? And that also the Gemara talks about why each one. That's just classic rabbinic kind of darshaning. But again, that is not my intention to focus on this evening. Lo tirat chamor achicha o shoro noflim baderach v'italamta mehem hakem takim imo. So too, if you see your fellow's donkey or ox fall on the road, do not ignore it. You must help raise it. So we learn here, and a lot of Tetze are a lot of mitzvot that are bein adam lachavero, that are between a person and their fellow. Okay, and the mitzvah of hashavat aveda, returning a lost object, is a very important one. It's about social responsibility. It's about looking after another person's belongings, right? The Baal Haturim, I'm not going to read it all inside, but he speaks about this idea of, well, maybe I will read it inside just for the sake of fullness. So he's talking about what happens when you lose an object. When you lose an object, all of a sudden you start to suspect other people. Says, I'm pretty sure Johnson has my ox, right? Johnson's been. I know when I've been walking through town, he's been looking at always asking me about it. I'm pretty sure he's got it. And so the Baal Haturim says, HaChoshed b'ksherim lokeh begufo. So we're down here at this section here. I'll try not to move that again. Okay. I just got logged out. I don't know why that happened. 1 second. Let me log back in. Apologies. Not sure why that happened. Okay. Okay, probably because I hadn't been on it for a while. So it says here, "Hachoshed b'ksharim lokeh begufo." This is just a general rabbinic idea, which is very relevant for our times, and in many, don't read too deeply into these statements. But one who has suspicions about someone who is kosher, they end up getting basically punished as a result. Lokeh begufo literally means they get afflicted on their body. So the rabbis have this idea that you have to be careful not to cast aspersion on someone who is innocent. Don't be so quick to judge other people and say, oh, they must have been doing something wrong. Umisha avda lo aveda. And somebody who has lost a lost object, choshed b'kol, af b'ksharim. They start to suspect everybody, and they say, it's Johnson, or maybe it's Rabinowitz, or maybe it's, Kohlberg, or whoever it is, You're the only person I see here. So or Davis, right? You start to say, it must be this person, must be that person. So they're themselves, they've lost something, and they begin to make it worse by suspecting other people of having stolen their goods. Vilokeh bigufo bitzarat. And the rabbis say that one of the ways in which you can get tzarat, right, that kind of leprosy type illness, is by wrongly accusing somebody of doing something. V'nimtza, so what happens here? V'nimtza k'shete'asof ha'aveda leveitecha, we find that when you're walking down the street and you find this ox, and you say, I don't know whose it is. It doesn't have a council collar around it. So you take it into your home and you look after it. V'tachzirena lo, and then after time you work out that this guy has lost his ox, and you return it to him. Az lo yachshod od ba'acherim v'te'asof oto mitzarato. Then you'll basically, not only are you returning his lost object, but you're also helping cure this person. You're helping heal this person, because up until this point, right, and that's what it says, the Baal HaTurim is picking up on this word of ve'asafto. So I'll show you here with the language. It says, Im lo karov achicha elecha v'lo yidato, if you don't know, if he's not close to you, or you don't know who he is, ve'asafto el toch beitecha, and you bring the animal into your home. So the Baal HaTurim is saying that's a weird word, right? Again, this is how rabbinic parshanut, commentary, works out. They pick up strange words, and then based upon the way, because it could have said it differently or more simply, based upon that word, they say v'asafto. So the Baal HaTurim says what this means is you're also kind of gathering in v'te'asof oto mitzarato. You're actually gathering in. You're not just gathering in the animal. You're also gathering in the person who's lost their animal, because as a result of them having lost their animal, now they begin to suspect other people of doing the wrong thing, and then they get afflicted as a result. And so what we're doing is, not only are we giving them back their lost object, we're also, in a sense, what are we doing? We are allowing them to heal. And I thought, again, whether you can tell me if you think this is a stretch or not, but I think what we're trying to do here, one of the main parts of the law of Hashavat Aveda, is restoring other people's faith in humanity. Right? We have to restore people's faith in humanity. You lose something, it's like, how do you get it back? But no, it's essential that we restore people's faith in humanity. And I thought that, in light of Rahman al-Islam, all the terrible things that have been going on this past week, and just like an awful week, and I think that we have a responsibility. Now, again, as they say in the modern parlance, haters gonna hate, right? So people hate, right? That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a lot of people who get swept up with that, who don't have an inner bias, who get swept up by seeing certain things, and unfortunately they're fed certain ideas by, God forbid, by what's in the media or what they see on social media. And so we have a responsibility here, through our ethical behavior, to restore people's faith in humanity. And this returning lost object is one example of it. But certainly in the modern world today and in our current situation, we need to ensure that we are doing what we can to restore people's faith in humanity. And that's by little actions. That's by, being mindful of our actions. That's by maybe going out of our way to be kind to people, right? And so I think this is an important message that sticks out, that kind of calls out to us from this week's parsha. Thoughts, questions, disagreements?
Amen.
Okay.
Great message from this week's parsha.
There you go. It's good parsha.
Yeah.
Let's do a little bit more. Let's do a little bit more. I've got a big piece and a short piece. Let's do one more short piece. I told you we're going to do it really, really, short and sweet. That was a bit of like what I would do as a Shabbat drasha there. That's a nice Shabbat drasha sort of message. It would have taken a lot longer, and Hilton hasn't fallen asleep yet. So
He obviously forgot that when you pass me going back to the Aron Kodesh, you always get a message on a Saturday morning.
That's right. I miss those messages, Hilton.
Sorry?
I miss those messages. Okay, give me 1 second. I'm just going to reorganize myself to ensure I know what I want to give over. Okay, let's share the screen one more time. This is a bit of a subtle point here. Let's look at what the Ibn Ezra says, and with this we will kind of draw ourselves to a close. The Ibn Ezra says here, and this is also on the mitzvah of returning a lost object. So the Ibn Ezra, look what he says. Lo tireh et shor, you shall not see your brother's ox. Afilu ata yotze lemilchama. Even when you go out to war. V'zeh derech drash, and this is by way of a midrash. This is midrashic, meaning this is not the halacha in a sense. It's not the pshat. It's not the simple reading. There's a drash. Now, there's different ways, as I mentioned. One of the classic ways that the rabbis perform or extract a drash is by picking up on the strangeness in the words. But what's another very common midrashic extraction point? What do you think? I'll ask the question differently, and I haven't done a good job setting you up. But based upon what I've been mentioning so far, what do you think is pushing the Ibn Ezra to make this midrashic, this conceptual link, right? Why is he saying, even when you go out to war? It would be helpful if you saw what's going on in the parsha right before this, right? So I'll just click on this for a moment. We'll just take a look. And again, think about what is this week's parsha called? Ki Tetze lemilchama, right? When you go out to war. So the whole thing is, if you just take a look back.
It'll be the same language.
What do you mean?
It's the same word, isn't it?
What are you saying? That later on down here? I'm not sure.
Ra'ita and lo tireh.
Oh, you're saying about seeing an Eshet Yifat Toar.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that. I think that's a more direct sort of attempt. I think they're just saying like the general context of the parsha is going out to war, right? The general context is when you go out to war and then, you fall in love with this woman and then, all these things happen, right? Do you guys know those books? If you give a mouse a cookie, do you guys have those books? Or like if you give a dog a donut, I think they're very American books, but they're these great books that basically it tells the story of a mouse. So there's different versions of it with different animals and different foods. But basically, if you give a mouse a cookie, he's going to want milk. And then you're going to see that there's no milk, so you have to go to the store. And then when you go to the store and you put on your clothing, then he's going to be reminded that he wants to go outside and, and play in the snow. But then we go, and basically each thing leads to another sort of thing that the mouse is going to want. Because you've got this mouse who's who's got like, he's all over the place, and then eventually brings it back to the milk, and then eventually brings it back to the cookie. And that's kind of like the standard sort of thing. So whenever I think of Tetze, it's basically, you're going to do this thing, and it's going to lead to this thing. It's going to lead to this thing, and it's going to lead to this thing. But obviously in very morbid and disturbing, less so than a mouse and a cookie. So basically we have this whole story. I don't know why I raised that. We have this whole story of Tetze, of going out to war. The general context of the parsha is to go out to war, etc., etc. And then we have what happens with the two wives and the two sons, and then the child is put to death, God forbid. That's a fascinating thing we could have explored on its own. The Gemara is very clear to say that ben sorer umore lo haya v'lo nihye, that a rebellious child, even though the Torah says that this is how you get a wayward child who's put to death, never was and never will be. That it's almost impossible for a child to actually be put to death in such a situation. Okay, and that, that's a separate exploration on its own. But in theory, what do? You put him to death. You put him to death, and we learn here, you must not let his corpse remain on the stake overnight. And then we go, and that's what I was telling you before about even the dignity of ensuring the dignity of a dead body. And then we begin the story of returning a lost object. And so what the Ibn Ezra is doing is he's saying that this whole story, or this whole narrative of the law of returning a lost object, takes place within the context of battle. And even you might think that obviously if you're in battle, like, you see an ox, like, what do? So he says, no, even in battle, you return the ox. Now, don't try this at home. And that's why I think the Ibn Ezra is saying it's just a drush. But what we are learning out from here, which is a powerful thing, that even in these kind of high-pressured, intense moments of being engaged in war, we must not lose our ethical sensitivity and sensibilities, right? We must not lose a sense of the needs of other people. You have somebody else, you might think that you're involved in this bigger process, right? You are, but don't lose a sense of that. Don't lose sense of that. And before I'll open it up to some comments, I think that, if we kind of extract from here as well, that often when we are in high pressured situations, intense situations that we are battling in, very often we are very focused on our own experience. And so the Torah is kind of telling us, even in these high pressured, intense situations, ensure that you do not lose sight of the needs of other people. And I think that, there's a lot of sadness and a lot of mental anguish going on right now. And we as rabbis are receiving a lot of it. And, I'm on these different WhatsApp groups, and it's intense. And as teachers, right, there's intense stuff going on, and people are pretty, they're struggling. And one of the things, thank God you are not in such a situation, then obviously we must do what we can to look after the needs of other people. And if a person is struggling, so, you need to address those issues and get the support and get the professional help. But a way that for people who aren't suffering from kind of chronic, mental illness or some sort of chemical imbalance, God forbid, a way to help a person kind of break out of a sense of despair is by looking after other people, is by being kind, is by putting the needs of others before our own. If we're going to be like, we can all feel very sorry for ourselves for various different reasons. And for good reason, maybe, people have different complexities. But a way, the Torah says here, a way to maybe step outside of that is to bring in the needs of other people. And so we are taught that through the story, through the law of Hashavat Avedah, of returning a lost object. We have a responsibility to look after the needs of other people. We have a responsibility to restore others' faith in humanity by taking responsibility and by kindness and by little deeds and big deeds of social responsibility. there's so much more that we can get from this week's parsha. I mean, there's awesome stuff here, but I thought that those were two short, powerful lessons that will, maybe can kind of take us into this week's, into Shabbos. So it should be a restful Shabbos, a beautiful Shabbos, and we can kind of put the week behind us, and, heal as best we can and move forward into a new week, please God. Does anybody have any thoughts, questions, comments?
I thought you were setting up for an Afghanistan comment in the second half. There, you could have.
In what way?
Oh, about dignity, about abandoning people, about the way to hang people up, about.
Yeah, I mean the complexity is like that's a situation where like there's very little to anything that we can do, unfortunately.
Yeah.
We have to focus like our little shtetl here of trying to look, but yeah, it's an awful situation there. Awful. Yes, Michelle. Oh, you're saying Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. Cool. So that's what I wanted to share with you tonight. Somewhat short and sweet. And I hope you all have an awesome evening and a beautiful Shabbat. And please God, we won't have to do too many more of these. I do imagine we'll be back here next week on Zoom, but hopefully not much longer.
Thank you. Shabbat
Shabbat
shalom.
shalom, everybody.
Shabbat shalom, everybody.
Shabbat shalom.
Thank you.
See y'all.
Andrew.
Bye.
Thank you.
Do you want to speak to Andrew or you're not?
It's too late. I just wanted to read my SMS. How are you?
I'm good.
So just this morning, I have a guy at work quickly.